Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that join us today with this webinar. I will be talking today about starting enterprise data models with XMLA endpoints in Power BI. A little bit about myself. My name is Gaston Cruz. I'm working as a solution principal for Slalom. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in their platform for the last 5 years, and I am showing some of my short biography here. I'm architecting data platform solutions using different platforms and tools. I have been defining governance planning in enterprise Power BI deployments using role-level security, Azure DevOps, and defining kind of lifecycle management for different report solutions. And also I've been working with some enterprise company how to optimize and perform complex data models in Power BI. So today I will be talking a little bit about how we can reach an enterprise deployment in data analytics using Power BI. And, right now Power BI is a solution where we can link Power BI with different data platforms solutions and grow our data model. So I will be talking from small company until the middle layer and to reach the enterprise layer. And I'm going to share some of the experience that I've been working on in the last few projects. I am sharing with you some of the social media for me. You can reach me via LinkedIn, Gaston Cruz, or via Twitter, Gaston F. Cruz, or via Facebook or email, gastoncruz@outlook.com. You can reach me after this webinar if you have any additional or further questions. You can reach me, and we can start kind of discussions if you have any kind of questions about what we will be covering today. So this is going to be the agenda for our webinar today. We will be covering some basic concepts behind the scenes in Power BI, some datasets connection, how we can switch and leverage the XMLA endpoints, what is going to be our endpoint URL, how are the different options to connect to the XML endpoints, how we can access SQL Analysis Services, and defining some enterprise data analytics solutions. And finally, we are going to cover how we can create in a different way for enterprise layer Power BI data models using SQL Data Tools or other tools, external tools that we can leverage to create and to deploy a data model using the XML endpoints. So let's start from scratch. I'm going to switch between slides and live demos because I love to kind of explain what is going on and how we can do exactly what we've been talking about in terms of using Power BI to deploy and to leverage these data models to the Power BI service. So now, every time we start with a new data model or we are going to start with a new report using Power BI, every time you open a Power BI desktop session, something that is really clear and should be clear for all of us is that Power BI desktop has an engine that is SQL Analysis Services that run in the backend all the time when we create any kind of report or we just open the Power BI desktop session. So when we open, and this is my Power BI desktop, now I have the November version of Power BI desktop. But most important here is I don't have any field, I don't have any data model, I don't have the first step in the lifecycle management of Power BI. I don't have the get data. I didn't cover the get data option here. But even when we open a Power BI desktop session and we open the task manager here, you can see that I am running in my task manager an engine that is SQL Server Analysis Services. Why is really important to know that there's a service of SQL Analysis Services running in my machine? It's because every time I create a new data model and I create a new report in Power BI, there's this engine running in my machine. So I have the ability to connect to this local session of SQL Analysis Services. So for example, if I am using DAX Studio or I am using Tabular Editor or I'm using SQL Profiler, I can reach that instance of SQL Analysis Service that is running in my machine to connect to my data model. So if I open any kind of report that I have here, let's say that I open a report that I create in Power BI Desktop, I can see that that report has a SQL Analysis Services in the backend, and I can reach that data model to create, for example, using Tabular Editor, I can create measures, I can create calculation groups, and I can deploy, I can leverage that data model using external tools. The connection to Power BI Desktop is going to be with this SQL Analysis Services engine. So that is first concept that is really important to understand. The other is one of the best practice right now and leverage governance in Power BI is split the Power BI Desktop itself in two different layers. One is the data model itself, or the Power Query, transformation, shaping of the data, splitting columns and all the stuff, and create the measures for the business. Calculations about summarization of sales or whatever calculations we need to bring to the business to solve those answers and to answer those questions that the business has. So we can create those measures and we can create the data model itself, and then we can publish that data model directly to the Power BI service. And then we can leverage and use exactly the same data model, the same data set in multiple reports. That is a best practice right now, and I am really strongly recommend to go to that path because you can reuse the same data model in multiple reports. So if we do that, if we create and we say, okay, I want to get the data from a SQL Server or any other report, let's say that I am open a report here, and when we open one of the reports here, we can open the reports and say, okay, I have this one here, for example, and I'm going to open one of the reports and I have all my fields here. And you can see that I am bringing this table here. Let's say that I remove, and let's say that this is only all my data coming from in this case, an Azure SQL database, and I can see exactly the connection here. If I open the transformation, I can see that I am getting all this data directly from an Azure SQL database. But if I go to this one here, I have only the data model, and you can see all my tables and my entities here. And of course, if I open my data model here and I only create this for the purpose of create just the data model, I can go to the publish option here and publish only this data set.
Hi,
and the way
Gaston,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt momentarily. It looks like you might just be sharing your slide content. If you're demoing information, we just got a comment that they can only see the concept. So if you want to switch over to sharing the entire screen,
Yep,
you might.
I'm gonna do that.
Or the window, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Let me do that. Yep, thank you. Let me know right now if you can see the screen. I am opening the Power BI desktop session just in case.
Yes, perfect. We can see the screen now. Thank you so much.
Great. So recapping a little bit here, what I'm showing right now is the Power BI desktop session where I get data from an Azure SQL database. I have all my tables and all my entities here, and all my DAX measures and all the stuff. I have all the data model itself, and what I was talking about is if I publish only this, I am publishing only the Power BI data model itself to this workspace, for example. If I publish this, I am publishing only the data model. And then if I go to this screen, and I am showing right now the browser itself, where I jump into this workspace, and I can see in this workspace that I have in the data set, that I publish the data model. So what I'm saying here is, and let's say that I can leverage like this one, I can leverage and promote this data model in my service. And what I'm saying here is I am using Power BI Desktop in the way I can leverage only the data model, and then another team can use and reuse this data model in several reports in Power BI to create new reporting layer. So I am saying we can split the workforce in Power BI in two different ways. One is going to be the team that is going to create the Power BI data model, Power Query, transformation, shaping data. The next team, or maybe the same team, can leverage new measures using DAX language to create the measures, and then we publish the data model to the service. That is this window that I'm showing right now. And after I publish this data set to the service, let's say that this is the one, AdventureWorks data set, then the next team is going to open another Power BI desktop session. Let's say that I open a new one, Power BI desktop session, and I'm going to open a new one just from scratch. And in the next one, in this session that I'm opening right now, I am going to go to the Get Data option here, go to the Power BI dataset, and instead of create the data model again, getting the data from my Azure SQL database or from Excel files or combining them, I already know that I have this AdventureWorks dataset that my other team, my data model team, work for me and promote this one, so I can just go here and create from this data model my report. So I can leverage, and you can see right now that all my entities come in here, and we can see that in this case, I can use any of these entities here to create my report. So my report is going to bring all the compute engine of the data model directly getting the data from the data set that lives in the Power BI services. So what I'm saying here is we are splitting in two different layers the lifecycle management of Power BI. One team is going to be the data model team, and the other team is going to be the visualization team. So going back again to the presentation, and what we are doing right now is using the Power BI services, where we are publishing data sets, creating dashboards, reports, workbooks, data flows. And what I was showing before was the option to get directly the Power BI dataset from the services. Instead of recreate the model each time we create a new report, we can reach directly the data model from the service. So we create a new report from the dataset that lives in the service itself. Next move that I'm going to talk a little bit is the XML endpoint. So if we are the administrator of the Power BI tenant, we have in the capacity settings in Power BI services, this option that one of the options, and this is only for Power BI, Power BI premium capacity. Right now, that this feature went to public preview a few days ago. The new licensing option in terms of Power BI premium per user, each user can leverage this type of licensing, that is Power BI premium per user. And those users that has this kind of licensing can reach directly the administration and leverage this read-write XML endpoint. So what is going to be the XML endpoint is going to leverage and is going to let us the option of XML endpoints to publish the XML endpoint directly from Power BI. So what I'm saying here is this option to read and write XML endpoints allow us to publish a data model directly to Power BI service. This option is going to get exactly the connection to the backend of analysis services and use Power BI as a semantic layer. Let's go directly to show that. What is the Workspace connection? Each workspace has a unique connection to the XML endpoint. So if I go, and I'm gonna show you that, if I go to the Power BI service again, and let's say that I'm in this workspace, QA Power BI, I can go to that workspace and go to settings here at the right of my screen. And in this option of settings, I can go to premium. And this is going to be my workspace connection to this workspace. So this is the XML endpoint connection, and I can leverage this XML endpoint connection to use that connection to connect to any of the data sets that lives in my Power BI services. So if I want to reach AdventureWorks data or this life expectancy or any data set that I have here, I can use those data sets, connect to this XML endpoint. So if I copy this URL that I'm showing here, in the old school, let's say 20 years ago, we can create, at that time we can create with SQL Analysis Services on premises, multidimensional data models, tabular data models. Right now, if I go to a session in SQL Management Studio, and if I open a SQL Management Studio session here, I can set that in SQL Management Studio. You can see right now that I am connecting to that Power BI XML endpoint, and I can see all my data models coming here. So how I connect to the XML endpoint? Just go to connect. Usually you go to SQL Management Studio and you connect to the database engine. I was saying that if you have an analysis services, and just to clarify the idea of the concept that we showed in the first part of the webinar, every Power BI desktop session has one open port and one open port that show me that I have that connection in my machine. So if what I'm saying here is, if I open a Power BI desktop session and I have a new report, I can connect to the server name as a local host, and I can say, okay, this is going to be my port of my connection in Power BI Desktop. What I'm saying here is, if I open a local host and go to that port, I can connect directly with my Power BI Desktop session that lives in my machine and works in the backend of my report in Power BI. If I want to connect to see all my data sets that lives in the Power BI services, via the XMLA endpoint, I can go here and copy and paste that URL that I showed before in the Power BI service. So going back here, you can see that I'm connecting to this workspace and I see this workspace connection here. I can copy this connection here, paste in the SQL Management Studio. And if I paste that URL and use the same account that I'm using in Power BI services, I can connect directly to see all my data models that lives in the service. And all of these are the data models that you can see in this window here of my Power BI services. So that being said, I can see all my data models that lives in with the connections and the tables that lives directly in the Power BI service. So I can see all the tables for each data model that I have in my Power BI service session. So that is, if I open here and say go to connections, open the connections, open the tables, and I can see all my tables coming for this data model, and I can see all the information from this table, from this data model. Going back to the slide, I can see that I can connect to the SQL Analysis Services that lives in the XML endpoints. And I can actually use SQL Analysis Services to have this MDX, so I can run any MDX select statement against my session. So if I go here and say, for example, in my SQL Management Studio, and I open a new query here, I can open MDX windows. And you can see that in this window, I can leverage and do the select statement. And I can execute that statement, and that is going to show me all the connection that I have from the SQL Management Studio. In this case, I don't have the permissions to run this against that server, but anyway, you can run this MDX against the server, and you can see all my connections that I have, or my sessions that I have connecting to this current session that show me the XML endpoints. So what is gonna be next, and what allow me to open this XML endpoints connection? One thing that is really important to understand is that if I have a data model, I showed in the first part of this demo that you can leverage a data model using Power BI Desktop, and you can create getting data from Azure SQL Database or Cosmos DB or any kind of data source that we have in Power BI Desktop, and create a data model directly in Power BI Desktop, and then publish directly the data model to the services. If I have millions of rows or billions of rows, another option that we have right now with the XML endpoint is open a Visual Studio Data Tools, and that is really important to understand that even if we download a version of Visual Studio Data Tools, and we can go here and go directly to the browser and search for this one, Visual Studio Data Tools, and you can open and download a standalone version of the SQL Server Data Tools for Visual Studio, and that allows you to download a version of Visual Studio 2019 or 2017, and you can use the Visual Studio community version to use the SQL Server Data Tools. There's one standalone version that you can download here, and I am showing directly the URL to download the SQL Data Tools standalone, and you don't need SQL Management Studio to run this in your machine. You don't need SQL Management Studio. You don't need a pre-version of Visual Studio. You can just download the SQL Data Tools itself, and it's going to download exactly this version of Visual Studio to run directly in your machine and create the data models from scratch using this version of Visual Studio. So you don't have any pre-requirements in terms of pre-install Visual Studio or pre-install SQL Server in your machine to create or to run this standalone version. So you can go directly to Visual Studio and open a Visual Studio window, and I'm gonna do that exactly to show you that I am running Visual Studio here. And actually, when you open Visual Studio from scratch, you can go here to File, New Project, and create in the Analysis Services option, the Analysis Services Tabular project, and you can start doing the Reactor demo project, and you can start directly from scratch creating your tabular model project here. Couple of things that I would love to share at this time. First of all, why I rather go to these options instead of using Power BI Desktop to create my data model. And this is one of the windows that show me one of the pros to use Visual Studio to create your data models. You can see that I can promote my data model to use TFS, Team Foundation Server, Azure DevOps. I have my server of DevOps here, and I can link my project to any of these repositories and say that, okay, I have this repository here with my folder XMLA Endpoints, so I am going to create my solution folder Reactor demo directly from this connection to Azure DevOps. So I can create, and I am linking, so if my team has 3, 4, 5 different data engineers working in the same data model, all of them can create and can use this repo using Azure DevOps. I can see that in my Team Explorer, I'm using Azure DevOps, and I have this Reactor demo solution tied to this Azure DevOps environment. So I can leverage all my source control. For example, here, I can see that in my source control, I have my Reactor demo here, and I can get the latest version, check in and checkouts, and I have all these continuous integrations and continuous deployment way to work with Azure DevOps, working with my data models in Visual Studio. So next move for us here is bring some data source to my data model. So I can right click here, import from data source. And what I'm showing here is the experience to create a data model in Visual Studio Data Tools is kind of the same experience that you have in Power BI Desktop. You start with the Get Data option. In this case, I just right-click in the data source, and I'm getting data, and I'm saying, okay, I want to create my data model with information coming from an Azure SQL database, from, let's say, the common data services in Power Platform. I can leverage this data model to create and get data from a SharePoint list, and I can leverage all my data sources coming. And what I'm trying to share here is the experience is exactly the same experience that you have, and you can leverage to bring data in Visual Studio using this way in Data Tools or in Power BI Desktop. Remember, in Power BI Desktop, when you start creating these options, the option that you see here is the Get Data option. So the experience to create data models in Visual Studio Data Tools is kind of the same experience that you have here. And I'm going to leverage this data model that I have here, just to show you that I have my data source here. I have the connections to two different Azure SQL databases here, and I can just, if I need to add, let's say, another table, another view from the Azure SQL database, I can right-click here, import new tables, and since I already have the connections to that SQL server, and I have a connection directly using SQL credentials that I'm using against that server, I can see that in that connection, I can leverage directly the connection to the server and open. And this is just an Azure SQL database. So if I go to this server, I can directly find that server in my Azure portal, and I can leverage that options to create the connection to that Azure SQL database. So if I open any of these connections here, let's see if I can connect to that one. I can see that in these options, you can connect to any of the SQL databases, and even if I am opening one of the connections here, let's say that I go to one of these tables and I right click and go to partitions, for example. Remember that one of the options that we have here is to create partitions if we are talking about, let's say, not dimension tables, but if we are talking about fact tables, we can create partitions here, and we can design partitions to say, okay, for example, if I am talking about the sales inventory, I can say, okay, this table is gonna get only the data for the last 1 month. So you can create the connection to show only the table. Let's see here to seems that my SQL Server needs this access, so I can go to my Azure portal and I can leverage that connection to that database coming. So I can show you that this IP need the access to that Azure SQL database. So what I'm gonna do right now is leverage that connection to. So you can see here that I can go to my Azure portal, and I'm gonna show you how you can go to your SQL databases. And let's say that you have the SQL Adventure Works here. So let's say that in the firewalls, I'm gonna add this client IP. And let's do the same with the server, just in case. Let's see if one of these servers has the databases, and let's open the connections to that one. So I have this one, and let's go to this one and edit the settings, and I can leverage that one directly from here. This is the test SQL database Windows Net sales LT. That seems to be right. So let's do this. In this option here, what we can do is actually we can leverage the Power Query option to leverage any of these tables. So what I'm saying here is in the Visual Studio Data Tools, you can use all the Power Query to transform, to shape data, to eliminate or delete any of the columns or any kind of transformation you have exactly the same tools that we have here in Power BI Desktop. And when we open a new Power BI Desktop session here, remember that every time you get the data from any of these data sources, you can shape the data using Power Query. Exactly the same options that you have in the Power Query window in the service itself. So when I go here and say, okay, I want the connection to a SQL Server, and I want to leverage the connection to my SQL Server here. Let's say that I have this one here. I have my server name here. Let's copy this and paste here. And let's say that I'm gonna do the import. This way to connect Power BI Desktop, and I'm gonna show you exactly that option. This way to connect my Power BI Desktop session, and let's say that I have this table, and then transform the data, and I'm jumping into this Power Query window here. And let's say that I don't want all the columns here. I only want these 2 lines, and remove the other columns. This kind of transformation that I'm doing right now, I'm going to the advanced editor, and this is the Power Query in my Power BI Desktop session. If I am doing the same in Visual Studio, and let's open again my Visual Studio, I'm going to my Reactor demo just to start from scratch and show you how you can import from any data source. Let's say that I'm going to connect to the SQL Server here, and I'm going to use the same server to do the connection. I'm going to use my database connection. And you can see that the experience here is the same experience that I have in Power BI Desktop. I am showing exactly the same, clicking one view and couple of tables here, and then the transform data is going to jump again to the Power Query, and I can do exactly the same. I can say, okay, I don't need all the columns here. I only need the 2 first one. I can remove the other columns, and I can import here. So what I'm showing is kind of the same experience that I have in the Power Query in Power BI Desktop. It's the same experience that I have in Power Query within the Visual Studio Data Tools, and I can get the data from an Azure SQL database. I can use exactly the same way of the credentials that I'm using in Power BI Desktop, and I have exactly the same experience to bring all the data coming to the Visual Studio Data Tools. Even if we are talking about the relationships here, I can through exactly the same relationships between tables and entities right here. So that is kind of the same experience that you have in your Power BI Desktop session. Even if we are talking about measures, for example, you have the same experience to, in this case, I'm counting sales here. If you see what is the option here, I am using exactly the same. And let me do this. I'm gonna just show you here that in this case, I am using the same DAX language that I'm using in Power BI Desktop. See that the only difference is that when we create the measure, it starts with the name of the measures, then you need the equal and the 2 dots to start doing the DAX measure itself. So every time you start with creating one measure, you can see here that my language of DAX Studio has exactly the same, all the same syntax that I have, and with all the formulas that we can use directly in Power BI Desktop. the same formulas that I can be using directly in my Visual Studio Data Tools. So after we are ready to go in the Visual Studio Data Tools, what I'm saying here is instead of going with my data tools and in the old school, we leverage this data model to SQL Analysis Services on premises. We can still use and deploy this data model to Azure Analysis Services. And let's say that I have this one here. And let's say that I have my Azure Analysis Services here. You can see that in my analysis services, I have this server here and I have this server name. So I can go here and say, okay, I want this server name and I can publish this data model that I have right now here. I can say, okay, I want this data model to bring to Azure Analysis Services. I can just right click here, go to properties, and I can use this. And you can see that I am just pasting the server name that I got from my Azure portal. This is my Azure Analysis Services, and this is the name that I want to bring to that data model. In the case of, I just show you that Visual Studio Data Tools allow you to publish your data model to SQL Analysis Services. And then in Power BI Desktop, I can do a live connection to that SQL Analysis Services, or I can publish, right now what I'm showing is I can publish the data model to Azure Analysis Services, and giving that name of the data model, that allow me to go to Power BI Desktop and do a live connection between Power BI Desktop and Azure Analysis Services. What is the power of that? The power is that all the compute engine of your data model, all the measures, all the calculations lives directly in Azure Analysis Services, instead of using Power BI Desktop to the data model and to the visualization purpose. So in this case, I am splitting all the compute engine of the data model to the Azure Analysis Services, and I am using Power BI Desktop only for the visualization layer. The next wave that I'm showing and I was talking about right now is how I can leverage the XML endpoint, how I can use Power BI Premium as a semantic layer, and that data model is going to live directly in the Power BI services. So let's go back again to understand that in this window here, where I show the workspace, and each workspace has their own XML endpoint. So I can go to any of the workspace that I want to leverage in my Power BI service. And in my case, I have this workspace under premium capacity. I can go to settings here, get my XML endpoint directly from here, copy this endpoint here, and go to my Visual Studio and say that, okay, I want to leverage this data model with the name reactor to this XML endpoint. So if I hit OK here, and then I deploy this, what I'm saying here is I am deploying the data model directly the data model to the Power BI Premium session. I am creating the data model from Visual Studio Data Tools, and I am deploying that data model directly to the Power BI Premium. So if I go back to my Power BI Premium right now, I can see in my Power BI Premium window here that I have a new data set ready to go right now, and this data set is going to be reactor. So this data set right now has, and I'm gonna just refresh this data set. Remember to refresh, because when you publish from the Visual Studio Data Tools to here, and let's see the credentials. Let's see the credentials here, so we can edit the credentials here, and let's say that I'm gonna use these credentials. I can use this one, the basic one, or the other one. This one, and I'm gonna use this one. So it seems that this one is having some trouble. Let me see this one, rules window. Okay, let's go directly to this one, and I'm gonna use this XML endpoint here. So if you have all the credentials in place, you can leverage directly the connection to your database, and you can use that directly as your XML endpoint. If I go, and that is the next move that I'm gonna make, is if I go to my Power BI desktop session, and let's say that I have this one, Power BI desktop session, and if I go here and get the data from my Power BI dataset, let's say that I'm gonna create a new one here. I'm just gonna create a new session of Power BI desktop to leverage my connection to the endpoint, and I can go to Power BI datasets here, get data, and I'm gonna use that reactor so I can go there, and you can see that my connection is to the reactor dataset, and I can bring all my data coming directly from that one. So what I'm saying here is the option to connect directly Power BI desktop to the XML endpoint is the same option that we covered in the beginning of this webinar. What I'm saying here is, instead of create the data model directly in Power BI desktop, you can create and leverage directly the model from your Visual Studio option. After you get the data, create the relationships, shape your data, create the measures, and finally, what you can bring here is the property of deploying your data model directly from Visual Studio with this XML endpoint, with the name of your data model, deploying directly the data model from your Visual Studio to Power BI service. Even if you have different data engineers working on the same data model, you have all the power to bring your solution connecting to Azure DevOps. So I have source control, the check-in, check-outs, all the versioning control, all the branches that I can have, merge the branch from one data engineer to the other. Of course, you can automate all the process of your continuous integration, creating a pipeline that, for example, deploy your data model automatically every Friday evening to your test workspace. So you can leverage not only the process of creating the data model in Visual Studio, you can leverage all the continuous integrations and the power of Azure DevOps to create kind of the data ops framework to publish the data coming from Visual Studio to Power BI services. So in these terms, what we are showing here is the power to use Power BI premiums as your semantic layer. And then all your teams that they will be working on the visualization layer, they can use Power BI Desktop to connect live to this data model that is going to live in Power BI Premium. So all the models are going to live directly here in your Power BI in your Power BI data set here. So you can deploy directly from Visual Studio to this place and then use Power BI Desktop solution to connect from here and doing live connections to your Power BI dataset. That is the main purpose of this. And finally, I'm gonna show you this. This is kind of the power right now that we have in Enterprise Data Analytics. You can leverage the XML endpoint to create the Power BI dataset. That is the main window here. And then you can use tools like we show today, the SQL Server Data Tools to create your data model, the SQL Management Studio to create to connect to your XML endpoint, the SQL Profiler to debug your data model and to see the latency and the calculations of your measures in your backend, leveraging Azure DevOps to do source control and continuous integration, and in the XML endpoint, you can connect with any kind of data visualization tool. So if you are doing Power BI Desktop, you can connect Power BI Desktop with your Power BI dataset. But if you are not using Power BI Desktop, you are using another visualization tool, you can leverage and connect to that XML endpoint using that visualization tool. So what I'm saying here is we can leverage semantic layers within Power BI services, and then we can use those data models even if we are not using Power BI Desktop to create our visualization objects. So that's gonna be all for today. I was really glad for this invitation for the Microsoft Reactor. I hope that everyone can follow the demo session and you can see the power of creating your data models directly with the Power BI service itself, how you can use the XML endpoint to create data models directly in Power BI Premium. Right now, we have a game changer in terms of this new licensing of Power BI Premium per user, because you can leverage those Power BI Premium per user to leverage this kind of XMLA connections, and you can use the whole workflow to create your data models directly with using Tabular Editor, using another external tool to leverage those calculation groups, new measures, and leverage new scriptings to create those data models directly in those external connections and publish directly to the XML endpoint as a new Power BI dataset. So thanks again for coming to this webinar. I hope that was new insights for you, and you can reach me via Twitter at Gaston F. Cruz. And if you have any additional comments or questions, or you need some details of what we showed today.
Hey, Gaston, thank you so much for presenting. Did you see the questions that were in the published tab?
No, but if you can share with me some of the questions,
yeah,
I'm gonna
love
be glad.
To.
Yep.
So, Rose asked, can we use this functionality with the new PPU license?
Yeah, I mentioned before that right now with the Power BI Premium per user, you can be able to switch that XML endpoint and can read and write using the PPU or Power BI per user premium licensing.
Okay, and Alex, I think, asked a follow-up question right around that same time that asked, is it only possible for premium workspaces?
Yeah, it's only possible for premium, but this new wave of Power BI Premium per user licensing, that's gonna allow almost everybody to do this, to follow this process.
Wonderful. And then they followed up and asked, how far are we from being able to use the Azure DEC ops with Power BI model?
Okay, the whole DevOps environment, you can right now leverage DevOps with Power BI Premium. It's not just an easy path, but I am strongly recommend everybody to jump into projects where we can leverage Azure DevOps with Power BI. So it's not an easy path, but it's totally doable.
Awesome. There's a few more questions, so thank you for bearing with me. I hope you have a few more minutes. They asked, are there any data sources that I cannot work with in SSDT that I would normally have in Power BI?
Oh, that is a really great question. If you compare side by side Power BI Desktop and Data Tools, there's a gap between them in terms of data sources. So I strongly recommend to go there and follow the Get Data option in Power BI Desktop, because they are leveraging a lot of new connections monthly basis to Power BI Desktop, and I think the SQL Data Tools is not moving just as fast as Power BI Desktop deployments. For example, last month, Power BI deployed 2 or 3 new connectors, like Anaplan, for example. That connector is not open yet in the SQL Data Tool. So I strongly recommend to go side by side in that comparison, because you are going to notice that maybe 65-70% are there in the Visual Studio Data Tools, but it's not there yet it's there yet in Power BI Desktop, but it's not there yet in Visual Studio Data Tools.
Great. And then it's probably a follow-up question to that as well. Would you suggest to use VS Studio for data modeling and then Power BI Desktop for visualizations?
Yeah, I've been in several projects right now, and when you start thinking about millions or billions of rows, if you are talking about, for example, an IoT project, or you are talking about a data model with billions of rows, and not just not only billions of rows, the cardinality of those rows are unique, for example, and you need more compute engine or more power in your compute engine. That is where I strongly recommend to go to this path of Visual Studio Data Tools, and could be Visual Studio Data Tools, or could be an external tool like Tabular Editor, for example.
Awesome, thank you for answering that question as well. It looks like that may be the end of the questions asked. If you want to wait a couple more seconds, we can do so. Otherwise, I think we're good. We can conclude. I shared in the chat window a couple of links to our free Microsoft Learning modules. You're able to basically walk through those trainings. If you want to get certified at the end, there is usually a fee with that, but as far as going through it, it's all complimentary. So definitely check those 2 links out if you want to learn more about Power BI and data analyst information. Also, I shared in the link a survey. We use the surveys basically to figure out additional content, future content, things that the community would like to see and experience. So please do take the time to click that link and enter the event code 11910. And let us know what you thought of this session, and also what sessions or info you'd like us to cover in the future. There's always new things coming out with technology, so there's definitely new topics always to be discovered or discussed. So Gaston, at this point, thank you so much once again for taking time out of your day to share this wonderful presentation with us. It seems like a lot of people really enjoyed it, and we hope to have you with us again in the future.
Thank you, Rebecca, again to you and to the whole team, and thank for all the attendees to this webinar. I'm really glad to be here today, and I hope we can meet each other in the future again.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a great day.